The Andy Pollin Show.
We got to go after this with everything we got, thinking they're going to come with everything they got.
I'll start off by saying I'm bored, I'm broke, and I'm back.
The Andy Pollin Show on ESPN 630 starts right now.
I have been doing sports radio in Washington for 31 years. And I was thinking about the stories that I've spent the most time talking about. Probably Dan Snyder, because he ate up 25 years of that, 24 years. In the early days, we talked a lot about baseball, whether or not we were going to get a baseball team. And not until 2005 did we get one. So I would put that up there. And maybe number 3 on the list is when are Maryland and Georgetown going to get together on an annual basis and play basketball? And it looks like we're on the doorstep of that, not this season, but next season. And there's a long history that really predates a lot of people, not me, but it goes back to the 1970s when Lefty Driesell had established Maryland as the premier program in the area. He came to town in 1969 and established the great teams early with Elmore and McMillan and, had a great program going. John Thompson came to Georgetown a few years later. It took him a while to get going, but by the 1980s, he had a powerhouse that had really surpassed Maryland, or at least equaled Maryland. And there were a couple of times that they played, but things broke off, and they didn't play for many, many years. And in 1993, so we're going back 30 years ago, this Thanksgiving, Russ Potts, who was a big-time promoter, put together a game at the Capitol Center between Georgetown and Maryland on the day after Thanksgiving, Friday. And then in those days, that's when the college basketball season would start. Starts much earlier than that now. But in 1993, that was the opening game. And they drew a nice crowd there. It was a predominantly Maryland crowd, even though that was Georgetown's home court at the time. And Maryland pulled off a big upset because nobody had ever heard of Joe Smith. And he turned out to be a real star. The game went to overtime. Dwayne Simpkins hit a shot at the buzzer, and Maryland won. And since then, in the 30 years since, they have rarely played. They met once in the Sweet 16 in the NCAA tournament. The last time that they played was 2016, and they played that game at Maryland, which was the first time they had played there in like 30 years. But yesterday, Kevin Willard, new coach at Maryland, I say new, he was on the job last year, but it's his second year. And Ed Cooley is the new coach at Georgetown. He's about to start his first year there. They're friends going back to their Big East days where Cooley was the coach at Providence and Willard was the coach at Seton Hall. And it looks like they've got a deal to get the game going next year, not this season. And Willard said is really Maryland's issue because they're set to play in a tournament in Asheville in early November, and they just couldn't get the game scheduled because of the way the conferences work and so forth and so on. But this is something that local basketball fans have been waiting for a long, long time, and I would hope that it becomes either a home and home, or I'm okay if they play it every year downtown, even though that's not Maryland's home court. It's a bigger place. It's centrally located. It's, a little bit different than going on the Maryland campus. And I think it would be a really cool annual event if they did this every November or December. And so that's cool. And we're going to talk more about that in the 10 o'clock hour, play some of the comments that were made by Kevin Willard yesterday during Media Day. And we'll get to that and much more as we roll towards 11 o'clock today with Tony back doing a show today. Also saw this, and I just saw this just before we started the show. It's still, of course, in the rumor stage, but you never know where these things lead. And, when you begin to think something is so far-fetched that it can't happen, well, maybe it can happen. So this is the latest rumor that's being thrown around. It's on Pro Football Talk regarding Caleb Williams, the superstar quarterback at USC, who was almost certain to be the number one pick of the draft. He won the Heisman last year, may not win it this year. I think he severely hurt himself with the 3 interceptions against Notre Dame last week, but he's going to go in the top 3 of the draft for sure. And the question is, where's he going to go? And other questions include, could he decide to go back for another year of eligibility at USC if he doesn't like where he's projected to go? Could he use that as bargaining leverage? And according to what Pro Football Talk has, representatives of USC quarterback Caleb Williams, this doesn't come from Caleb himself, just representatives, have been making it known to prospective agents that Williams wants partial ownership of the team that selects him in 2024 if he declares for the draft. Well, lots of luck, Bubba, on that, because, you're not a certain thing in the NFL. We've seen star quarterbacks, hello, Robert Griffin, not do as well as perhaps they're projected to in the NFL. We've seen number one picks not make it. See Jamarcus Russell, who was taken number one by the Raiders. Tim Couch was taken number one by the Cleveland Browns. The road is paved with busts. So nobody is going to give Caleb Williams partial ownership. If that is the demand, then he doesn't get drafted by that team. And the problem he's going to have is he's going to have to declare for the draft if he wants to play in the NFL this year. He can't go back if he doesn't like where he's drafted. So he's got to make a decision. Either he stays at USC and continues to collect big money because he's probably making about $3 million a year doing Wendy's commercials and all the other NIL money he's collecting, or he declares for the NFL draft. And one of the reasons you want to do that is, yes, you're going to be making less money as a rookie in the NFL than you would for another year of eligibility at USC, but you want to start the clock on your rookie deal so you can get to that second contract, which puts you market value these days for franchise quarterback in the $50 million a year range. So it's just maybe it's just a wild rumor that's out there. It has not come from Caleb Williams. It hasn't come from his dad, by the way, who said several months ago that if they didn't like where he was projected to go, that he might go back to USC. But he's done a good job of not saying too much and staying to what he's supposed to do, and that's to be the quarterback at USC. All right, baseball. Wow. Phillies. Wow. Yes, this happened again.
Schwarber, a high drive into right center. He's watching. It's flying. Goodbye. Schwarber strikes again.
Two more bombs for Kyle Schwarber and the Phillies' 10-0 win over Arizona last night. It is his first multi-homer game of the postseason, but he's now got 18 postseason home runs, which matches Reggie Jackson for the most ever by a left-handed batter. Now, you got to realize that there are more rounds of playoffs, more postseason games these days. But Reggie was in every year pretty much. He was part of those great A's teams that won 3 straight World Series in the 1970s, early part of the decade. Then he went to the Yankees, won back-to-back World Series. Then he went to the Angels. They were still winning. They were still getting into the postseason. So Reggie played a lot of postseason games. Just in those days when he was an active player, you only had the divisional or the championship series, I should say, the American League Championship Series, and then you went to the World Series. And I think for his entire career, the League Championship Series was best of 5. So he's playing a maximum of 5 before he got to the World Series. But he will forever be known for what he did in Game 6 in 1977 when he hit 3 straight home runs off 3 different pitchers on 3 first pitches. And what Schwarber is doing is absolutely remarkable in a sport that has stayed pretty much the same for like 150 years. And you remember the June that he had here, and I looked up the numbers again. They're just staggering. This goes back 2 Junes ago, so it's June of 2021. Schwarber came here for the 2021 season as the Nationals were still hanging on to hopes that they could be a contender. We had the COVID year of 2020 where they only played 60 games after they won the World Series. So there's a reset in 2021, and the hope is you still got Scherzer. You hope that Strasburg can pitch, and Trey Turner's still on the team. Juan Soto's still on the team, and with some veterans, you can get back in it. Well, didn't happen, but we had a month of June where there was real hope, and the month of June that Kyle Schwarber had for Washington, 16 home runs, 7 of them to lead off the game, which is a major league record. He was 28 of 100 at the plate, so his batting average wasn't through the moon. He hit 280 for that stretch. He had 30 runs batted in, 13 walks, and 33 strikeouts. Here's the most remarkable thing about the 16 homers in the month of June. He hit the first one on June 12th. He went through almost half the month without a home run and then had this barrage where he hit 16 before the month is over. Unfortunately, he injured his hamstring, went on the injured list, and they traded him at the trade deadline. But baseball is slow to catch on to things. And Kyle Schwarber, when he was leading off here in 2021 for Davey Martinez, it wasn't like this was the first time this was tried. Schwarber had been doing this in the past for the Chicago Cubs. And you remember in 2016 when the Cubs won the World Series, Schwarber was a big contributor with some home runs, but nobody paid attention if he batted first because he had hardly played that season. He hurt his knee in like the first week, missed almost all of the regular season, came back for the playoffs, and was a big part of what the Cubs were able to do. But nobody was really talking that much about him as a leadoff hitter. They were around here, but it was short-lived because he was done pretty much at the end of June, didn't play here again, and was traded at the trade deadline a month later. Finally, the Phillies this year, and maybe it was something out of desperation, they were 24th in the majors in scoring through June 1st. They inserted Kyle Schwarber as the leadoff hitter. And his numbers would say to you, if you're a traditionalist, oh, no, he can't be a leadoff hitter. He hit 197. He led the majors in strikeouts. He didn't steal a base, but he hit 47 home runs, drew walks, and since he's gone into the leadoff spot, the Phillies have been thriving. Manager Rob Thompson did it out of desperation, and it's not like Schwarber was tearing it up in another spot in the order. He was hitting 160 at the time, so they put him in the leadoff spot, and the rest is history. Now they're on their way, well on their way, to the World Series with a 2-0 series lead as the series shifts to Arizona tomorrow night. But, you know, they are pretty much in the driver's seat, and they have been dominant with power, really. And here's a number for this. Teams that out-homer the other in the postseason this year are 17-2. So if you hit more home runs in a game, the sample size says you're pretty much going to win the game. And the Phillies, were able to tee off last night. Trey Turner had a home run as well in their 10-0 win. Now, you say to yourself, well, okay, where did this start? Who came up with the idea of putting a guy who's a power hitter, who strikes out a lot, who doesn't steal bases in the leadoff spot? Who came up with this? Well, probably the only one who could, because he has been known to think outside the box. Now, he's not currently working. He was fired by the Angels. But Joe Maddon is known as an innovator. So he's on with Brian Kenny, not last night, but on Monday night after Schwarber hit a home run in that game, in the opening game for the Phillies. And he explained to him, this is Joe Maddon talking to Brian Kenny, he explained how he came up with the idea of putting Schwarber in the leadoff spot and what went into it.
He always had a good eye. So it started with on-base percentage. I thought that he would get on base at a high clip at that particular juncture. The part that was difficult was that just him versus lefties, it wasn't as comfortable as it is right now. At that point, he really did struggle a lot more against lefties than righties. So it's hard to have a leadoff hitter set there if you have to platoon your leadoff hitter. So, but it started with the on-base percentage. Then here was the power. And obviously, he showed it to you last night what he can do under those circumstances. He turned the game around on the very first pitch.
Right.
Furthermore, when he bats further in the batting order, I don't think he sees the same pitches. When you bat him down lower, he doesn't hit a lot of home runs, I don't think, with multiple runners on, but he gets you like that. He'll ambush you and get you like that because the pitcher sees him differently. He doesn't see him as a threat with multiple runners. When it's multiple runners, he gets pitched at differently. So I think it benefits him all the way around.
Yeah, I didn't realize it. I look back at that season. I thought, he's hitting 240, 250. That was a little later. He was still hitting like 211 back then. So how was it received when you were doing that? And we don't have the batting average up there, but it's like 211, 215. How was it received in the old days?
No, the old days. It wasn't received that well. I mean, I constantly had to defend him. I thought it was the right thing to do. I liked it a lot. You see all that movement he has right there. He got rid of it, a little bit of that. But that was in Pittsburgh in that playoff game. He went into the Allegheny River. But he's capable. How about this one on the scoreboard in right field? He had all of that in him. He's become refined as a hitter. He's always had a good eye, but he's got less movement. He's more definitive in what he's going to swing at, and he doesn't miss. I know he struck out a little bit, but he's really dangerous on every pitch.
I think the main takeaway, at least for me, from what Joe Maddon says is when he's in the leadoff spot and basically the slate is clean, particularly when you start the game, they're pitching to him differently. You know, when the pitcher faces the leadoff hitter to begin a game, the first thing he's thinking about is get him out so he doesn't get on base. And the traditional leadoff hitter is someone who can get on base and steal bases. Rickey Henderson, the Hall of Fame leadoff hitter, who's been known as the greatest leadoff hitter of all time. But maybe we have to rethink this for what Kyle Schwarber is doing for the Phillies right now, and at least for a few weeks in June of 2021, what he did here. Again, phenomenal. 16 home runs starting on June 12th through the end of the month, 7 of them to lead off a game. And remember, when you lead off a game with a home run, you're already putting the other team in a hole. You're already making the starting pitcher feel like crap where he just served up a dinger. And a lot of times he's jumping on the first pitch. And he's thinking, oh, God. So it's a lot different. So it works both ways. It works for the team that obviously gets the home run, and it works really more than just one run against the team that gives it up, because that's how the game begins. You know, a baseball game sometimes resembles like a heavyweight fight where they feel each other out for a round or two. But when you come out like Mike Tyson and you hit the other pitcher right in the mouth with a leadoff home run, it makes it a lot different. God, the Phillies have been fun to watch, and so have the Rangers, and they're playing again tonight with Max Scherzer on the mound. This is classic Scherzer battling back from an injury when he had been counted out, as he had been in the World Series 4 years ago. Nobody expected him to be able to take the mound in Game 7 when he could not even turn his neck in Game 6 in Washington. So he did remarkable things here, and I would not count him out. Of course, he could get shelled tonight. You know, he could. But boy, the Rangers are in a great spot, having won the first 2 in Houston, and now coming home for Game 3 tonight. And if we talked about this yesterday, if you missed it, I would urge you to read the Tom Boswell column in the Washington Post. The hand-wringing that may be going on about, oh, God, all these guys who used to wear the curly W starring in the postseason. What if? No, it worked out pretty much the way it should have worked out. And as Boswell wrote in his column, had they re-signed these stars, not necessarily Schwarber, but some of the others, you know, if Max Scherzer was still here, you know, you would have a team kind of like the Angels. You'd have some really high-priced stars that would finish below 500. So be happy with your World Series. I am. I'm thrilled that we have a World Series champion here. I know it's 4 years old, but a lot of people don't see it in their lifetime. I got one in mind. Stay with us. We're going to get to what Jeff Saturday said about Justin Herbert. Speaking of what ifs, what if the Commanders had drafted Justin Herbert instead of Chase Young? We'll explore that a little bit and more as we continue with the Andy Pollin Show, ESPN 630.
The Andy Pollin Show on ESPN 630, the sports capital.
Oh, looks like another lovely day out there today. 67 degrees, sunshine. Supposed to get cold next week, but enjoy the last part of well, it's not summer, but early fall. I guess we get into the teeth of fall next week. Got a Tony show coming up at 11 o'clock. Also in the next hour, it was 70 years ago today that Willie Thrower became the first, what a name, Willie Thrower became the first African-American ever to play quarterback in the NFL. Didn't start the game, played only one series, but history was made on this day 70 years ago. And when I look back on that, I want to go through how slow the NFL was to change. This happened in 1953. African-American quarterbacks didn't become mainstream until really the end of the century. And it's, you know, remarkable when you think of all the great talents who could have been great quarterbacks in the NFL but never got the opportunity to do it. Even Warren Moon, who's in the Hall of Fame, had to go play, I think, 5 or 6 years in Canada before he got his shot in the NFL. He took Washington to the Rose Bowl, and in a draft that had, in those days, 12 rounds, nobody took him. Nobody even said, let's see what we got here with a 12th round pick. No, he had to go play in Canada, was a star there, then went to the Houston Oilers, and the rest is history. So we'll look on that and really with shame, I think, for the NFL that it took that long to evolve from there. In the NFL today, in quarterbacking, we don't really think about it much, although even Lamar Jackson, who's been in the league, 5-6 years, he had to overcome a lot of that because they were asking him to run as a wide receiver at the combine. And no, he said, I'm a quarterback. And he went all the way to the end of the first round. Ravens didn't take him till 32 overall, and he's become one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL. Quarterbacks. So Chase Young went number 2, as we know, to Washington in 2020. And he's had some good games. He's had some good moments. He's playing pretty well right now. But he's been injured a lot. He missed most of last season and half the season before. He didn't start the opener this year because of a stinger in his neck. And they have elected not to pick up the 5th-year option on his contract. So more than likely he's going to become a free agent at the end of the year. And, you don't like to see the number 2 pick of the draft have just sort of a so-so run and you get basically nothing for him in return. I would have traded him before the start of the season. I don't know how much interest there was, but I thought if you could get a 3rd-round pick, you'd take it. But he's probably going to walk at the end of the year. And in that draft, there was a quarterback sitting there that would have looked really good, and that's Justin Herbert, who didn't go till 10 to the Chargers. And he's gotten the long contract extension. He's being paid like the young greats, like Joe Burrow, who got his deal shortly thereafter, and Trevor Lawrence will get his down the road. There'll be quarterbacks who are getting these things, and Chase Young, I would say by and large this didn't work out. I don't want to say complete bust, but it didn't work out. So you play the what if game on Justin Herbert, who for all of his success statistically has not won a playoff game yet. Did play in one last year where they blew this incredible lead against Jacksonville, and failed to close it out on Monday night against the Dallas Cowboys. So while we look at him fondly from here and say, ooh, what if he'd come to Washington? They wouldn't be going through all this churn and burn at quarterback and, keeping your fingers crossed on Sam Howell, who looks really good at times, but maybe on his way to being sacked more than any other quarterback in NFL history in a season. He's he got 34 sacks through 6 games. But Justin Herbert is not, I don't know if he's an elite quarterback, but I think he gets looked upon as, is he Joe Burrow? Burrow's taking a team to a Super Bowl. Is he not? Is he Trevor Lawrence? I don't know. So Jeff Saturday was on our morning show yesterday, and the question was asked about Justin Herbert as to whether, in fact, he is an elite quarterback.
He's a top 10 quarterback right now. Like he's got 9. Oh, guaranteed. Like if you looked at his numbers, his stats, all that kind of stuff, I bet you he's what's he got? He's got 10 touchdowns. How many interceptions? Yesterday was the second pick, right? Mm-hmm. I remember them saying that on the cast. But I mean, when you look at it, that's going to be the deal. People are going to look at it and go, well, his numbers produce. He does this. The numbers are always going to tell you. That he's going to be in there. So where is he? You see?
Yeah, he's 13th in yards. Okay. He is. I'm looking at his touchdowns right now. He is 9th in touchdowns. So yeah, right around the top.
So
10.
he's gonna. Yeah, man. So when you're talking about the NFL, there ain't many who can do it. So if a guy can do it and make these plays, they're always gonna defer to. It's everybody around you. You know what I mean? Now, he hasn't had that, marked moment where he takes his team and just goes, hey, this is what we're going to do with it. In my opinion, though, part of that stuff is on the coaching side. You know what I mean? Like Staley has been, and I know he gets blasted. I'm not saying he gets a pass, but that does affect the quarterback, right? Like a lot of those things that you're trying to do, a lot of the pressure that's trying to be, it does go to the quarterback in those situations. And so I think people say, okay, well, if a coach is going to act that way, you can't blame the QB. I think that's why he gets kind of the pass.
Yeah, and I would take him. If Justin Herbert were here, I'd be very happy with the Commanders' quarterback situation. Didn't work out that way. He slid all the way to 10. Hey, Tom Brady slid to the 6th round. What are you going to do? The Bill Belichick twist in the wind continues as we watch week to week as to what's going to happen. I think most people feel that even if things go even worse than they are now, that he won't get fired before the end of the season. But is it a sure thing, even that he's going to go at the end of the year, given that he's got 6 Lombardis in the trophy case? Jeff Saturday, also on the show yesterday, on our morning show on Discipline, he says, the way things look right now, and he didn't even allow for the possibility that it might change over the second half of the season. Belichick's gone.
I think it's already sealed to some degree.
Really?
I do. I think Robert Kraft comes in, excuse me, and says, something's got to change. Like, you either got to give over front office responsibilities. We're going to bring somebody in to bring in talent, because the GM Bill Belichick has really hurt the coach Bill Belichick, and I'm going to save you from yourself, right? Like, and if Bill balks at that or goes, hey, I don't want to, because Kraft's got a duty as an owner of who he's bringing, and you're looking at that football team going, I mean, Parkman, that thing hits you in the hands. You got They don't got any dudes who scare you. And so, and you can blame it on the quarterback. You can blame it on a lot of different things. Their defense is playing well enough to win. Offense can't get out of their own way. But this keeps showing up. And you try to do it with some coaches that weren't coordinators. Now you're bringing Bill O'Brien in, which is great. But there ain't enough guys. You and I both know, man, Jimmy's and Joe's matter, right?
Yes.
Like at some point, those guys got to play better than you can coach. And that's every team in the NFL. Some players got to elevate, and there's nobody over there. When the tight end is the guy who you can count on more than, unless his name is Kelsey, you in trouble, man.
Yeah.
You in deep trouble. Yeah. That's where they are.
He talked about Robert Kraft. It's Jeff Saturday back as an analyst at ESPN after a failed run as coach of the Colts. That never had a chance. I mean, he never coached in the NFL before, and he gets called away from TV to coach a team in the middle of the year. I don't know if he's ever going to go back to coaching, but he's very, very good on TV. And he may actually have some relationship with Bob Kraft. What he says there may come from some off-the-record conversation that he had with him. And I say that because you may remember this. When the lockout was settled in 2011, remember that? When that was the year that they had Rex Grossman and John Beck as the quarterbacks of the then Redskins, as Mike Shanahan was beginning his second year. And we had a lockout, which knocked out a lot of training camp. It didn't cost the NFL anything in games except the Hall of Fame game. That was canceled that year. But otherwise, it was business as usual. And Jeff Saturday was one of the high-ups on the Players Association. And when they settled, when they had a deal, you saw him hugging Bob Kraft. Now, some of it was because his wife had just passed away, Kraft's wife. But also, it could be that they have this kind of cozy relationship. The former player, owner, even though they weren't on the same team, maybe there is something there, and maybe he does have some real insight as to what's going to happen with Bill Belichick. But he's saying it's done. It's a foregone conclusion that Belichick is out. Barring him running the table the rest of the season, which isn't going to happen because people who observe the league are telling you this is one of the worst rosters that's been constructed. You just don't have any talent there, and you've lost a couple of key players to injury as well. More from the NFL. This was Dan Patrick talking to T.J. Watt yesterday, one of the premier pass rushers from the Pittsburgh Steelers. And I'm going to tie this in with the owners' meetings, which are getting underway today in New York, and things that are being discussed there. But Patrick asked a very good question, I thought, of Watt, and that's regarding how the rules are adjudicated.
Why isn't roughing the passer reviewable?
I don't know. It's a good question. It's hard. We do everything we possibly can, and I was talking to the ref the other week that when you go to tackle the quarterback, I'm rotating as hard as I can. And I'm taking the hit because the quarterback's landing on top of me. But it's just the life that we live, and we have to adapt as much as possible because those penalties are massive, game-changing penalties, and they're 15 yards and a first down.
Yeah, but they should review them. If we review basically every play, TJ. When you think about it, there's time to review because that's what the broadcasters do. That if you have the New York office look at these plays and then say, hey, you know what, that hit wasn't to the face. Or, as you said, these are game-changing, type of plays here. And it feels like I know they're trying to protect the quarterback, but you got to help out the defense just a little bit here. And no rules are to benefit the defense. When's the last time you had a rule that benefited the defense?
Offensive holding helps me from time to time, which is nice. But yeah, it's one of those things that's obviously way above my pay grade. We just try to adapt to the rules that are in place and try to play as clean and smart as possible.
Okay, why are they letting the tackles line up a little bit further back off the line against you guys?
That's something we're tackling too, and the refs are getting better at it. The thing is that if a tackle lines up a little deeper, they're going to be more lenient on letting us take that credit card line and are getting as close to the line of scrimmage as possible. So it's kind of an in-game thing. Hopefully, if he's lining up a little deeper, they're not giving him that 2 clicks of the remote head start, that whatever they call it.
It feels like it's an advantage because the offensive linemen haven't kept up athletically with the edge rushers. So they're almost they're
calling shots.
Yes, I am. Absolutely. Here's another thing that they're calling: offensive linemen downfield, like these bubble screens. It feels like these linemen get out there, but they are calling that. It feels like a little bit more. It seems like a point of emphasis here.
Yeah, I mean, I would like to think they're trying to call everything, and I understand there's a whole lot going on, and I don't know if you have enough bodies to really see everything. I mean, like we always say, you could call a holding on every single play. It's just a matter of what they're able to see and what's not going to slow the game down.
But what if I said offensive linemen have to wear mittens?
Incredible.
That they can't hold you.
It would be awesome. I think you'd see a lot more pass rush wins across the league.
That's T.J. Watt from the Steelers on with Dan Patrick yesterday. You know, the rules have changed for offensive linemen, and they had to change. Otherwise, the quarterbacks just would have been mauled. But back in the day, back maybe 70s, as late as the 70s, early 70s, linemen used to have to keep their hands to their chest. They could not extend their arms, or that would be holding. How you're going to hold out some of these pass rushers today, Aaron Donald and Watt and other, I mean, it'd be impossible. So they've changed it a lot. And careers end because of elbow injuries and shoulder injuries. And back in the day, you had to keep your hands into your chest. And I remember when I was learning how to play football at the YMCA, that's the way they told us to do it. And had to do that when I was in high school. I couldn't block anybody anyway, but, I had to keep my hands in my chest. And T.J. Watt is one of the best in the business. He gets to the quarterback even when there is like legalized holding. And by the way, I did post-game shows for many, many years with Joe Jacoby, and he said pretty much there's holding on every play. He says what you do when you line up for a play, you keep an eye on where the referee is so you know which hand to hold with. So, that's and that as far as the mittens go, I don't think that would work out well for the league. I think that the way it is now, yeah, I mean, could you review holding? Maybe, but you don't always get the good camera angle. And the roughing the passer, I think, is reviewable because sometimes they're a little flag happy. Sometimes it would make a lot of sense if they could pick up the flag. But whether they do that or not, we'll have to see. They are discussing rule changes right now as the owners are meeting in New York. And I said this the other day, and this confirms this. Kickoffs are dead in the NFL. The ball is either kicked out of the end zone or, and I can't remember even seeing this year. Maybe, it's in other games. I watched every snap of the Commanders this season. You'd have the same rule that you have in college. If the kickoff is, let's say, fielded inside the 20-yard line or the 15, wherever you take it, you can make a fair catch and the ball comes out to the 25. But it seems like every kickoff I've seen goes out of the end zone. Well, they put this rule in for safety, or at least, the appearance of safety where you can have the fair catch. And it's not really working out. Rich McKay, longtime head of the competition committee, he's with the Atlanta Falcons. He's their president. And he says that the new kickoff rule allowing touchbacks from inside the end zone has produced an 80% touchback rate through the first 6 weeks. And McKay said, and he's right, nobody in the league would say that's successful. It's what we knew would happen. We achieved the one thing we needed to achieve, which is to take the play with a high collision rate and reduce concussions. But we've made it a bit more ceremonial than it should be. So they're discussing alternatives to this. They have the XFL rule where the players can't get a running start, just the kicker. There's all kinds of things that they're talking about. But, I think that's maybe the most exciting play in football. It doesn't happen very often, but when it does, my God, it's incredible. We had Devin Hester and Brian Mitchell did this. These guys made careers out of returning kickoffs. Yeah, they return punts too, but if you're not going to have that play in football anymore, you might as well not even kick off. You might as well just give the team the ball who gave up the score on the 25-yard line. What's the point of it if you don't have it anymore? So I'm glad they're going to address that. There's also this hip drop tackle that's become an issue. It increases the odds of an injury, according to their research, and they say it's somewhat like the horse collar. So they're talking about legislating that out. Also, the Guardian caps, those big padded things that you see players wearing in training camp, they are saying that they reduced head injuries 46% compared with the 3-year average before, which would perhaps lead the way for, in the future, these Guardian caps, these big padded things, big ugly things that looks like, the sumo suits that you see, that it could become mandatory in the NFL, that everybody will have to wear one, or maybe they even grandfather people in like they did in hockey, when they made hockey helmets mandatory. Players who had been playing without helmets, like Rod Langway, got to continue to play the rest of their careers without it. Maybe they'll have that. And, of course, they're looking at the tush push, made famous by the Eagles. McKay said, we'll talk about it again. I'm sure of it. I'm not predicting business of what it means. So there's that. And they've also changed the timing of when these interviews can take place. This probably has hurt Eric Bieniemy over the years, that because the Chiefs have been regulars in the Super Bowl, that he hasn't been able to schedule interviews at the right time. So they're trying to even that out. And then the big discussion about grass versus turf. And the NFL does not have a uniform policy on the types of surfaces used in league cities. The Players Association is mandated in the collective bargaining agreement to work with the NFL on what they call best practices. Well, best practices for here, Baltimore, most cities is you have outdoor stadiums, is to have grass. But can you do that at MetLife Stadium, where both the Jets and the Giants play? Can you do that in Detroit, which is an indoor stadium? Yes, they have grass fields that slide in and out in places like Arizona and Vegas, but can you do it? So that's going to be discussed as well as they continue the owners' meetings in New York. You know what else is refreshing about these owners' meetings? That the last few years, at least the last two, it's we're monitoring whether the hell they can get the owner out of here, and now we got a new owner, so that's moot. Nobody's worried about the ownership in Washington anymore. That is refreshing. Coming up in the next hour, Kevin Willard had media day with Maryland yesterday, said, among other things, that they are working on a series with Georgetown. Hopefully it's an annual game. He's friends with Ed Cooley, who's come over from the Big East a year after Willard did. It's Cooley now the new coach at Georgetown. He said they're pretty close to putting things together. They hope to have something this year. They just weren't able to do it, so we'll get into that. And Al Michaels was on Jimmy Kimmel the other night and talked about the Taylor Swift effect, as Taylor Swift was at the last game that he did, which was last week, Kansas City hosting Denver, telling some funny stories about how that unfolds. We'll get to that and more as we continue. It's the Andy Pollin Show, ESPN 630. We're rolling through the 10 o'clock hour, as we do every day, along with the 9 o'clock hour, and some days we have Tony at 11 like we do today, and sometimes I roll just till noon. But today we're going to stop at 11 for Tony on what is just a gorgeous day. I hope to get outside this afternoon and enjoy some of this sunshine. In this hour, later on, I think this is very significant to point out. It's kind of a forgotten thing in NFL history. But it was 70 years ago today that I guess the aptly named, or maybe the unaptly, depending on how you look at it, Willie Thrower became the first African-American quarterback to play in the NFL. Not start the game, but just get on the field and play quarterback. So this is 1953. The NFL started in 1920, so it took 33 years for an African-American to play that position, and really, I guess might have been the late 40s, but not too many years earlier than 1953 where the first African Americans coming in, and it took another 9 years, sadly, for the Washington Redskins to integrate. So things move slowly, and even with this, what should have been a seismic move in 1953, it took an awfully long time for things to change. And in fact, not until this calendar year, 2023, did two African-American quarterbacks face each other in the Super Bowl, as Patrick Mahomes quarterbacked the Chiefs and Jalen Hurts quarterbacked the Eagles, and gave us one of the great Super Bowls of all time. And to think that things take as long as they do, it's a sad commentary, but it's worth looking back on and how it unfolded. And there's a little nugget in there regarding the movie Brian's Song that I want to tie in with Willie Thrower playing in that game, also with the Chicago Bears, also coached by George Halas. So, college basketball. We talk about this all the time. If you're a local, if you've been here for a long time, there's probably been times where you've talked about wanting to see Maryland and Georgetown play every year. Now, the programs are in different places right now. Georgetown is in a complete rebuild under Ed Cooley, who comes in from Providence. Patrick Ewing had a little bit of success along the way, but in the end, the last couple of years were just complete disasters with ridiculously bad records and teams that weren't drawing anybody to see them play. And so a change had to be made, and that kind of cuts ties with all of the John Thompson era. The great John Thompson retired, or he didn't say, he said resigned, never got back to coaching, but I think his intention at the time was, this was in 1999, he turned it over to his assistant, his longtime assistant, Craig Esherick, who had played for him. Esherick did get the team to the Sweet 16, but didn't achieve the success that Big John did. And then John Thompson III came in and got Georgetown to the Final Four in like his third year, and then he fell on bad times too, wasn't drawing anybody, and they still kept ties to the Thompson regime by bringing in the greatest player that John Thompson ever coached, Patrick Ewing. And Patrick, did as good a job, I think, as he could have. I just think that there were a lot of extenuating circumstances there, and ultimately he was fired at the end of last season. I don't know whether he'll coach again or not, but I think he's a fine man. He was a great player, and certainly paid his dues to become a coach before he got the opportunity to become a head coach. He was an assistant in the NBA for many, many years, like 15 years, waiting for a chance to coach in the NBA. That didn't come, so he took his alma mater and tried, but it just ultimately didn't work out. So we'll see what Ed Cooley does, and I'd like to see him establish the program as a powerhouse again, because those were some fun days back in the 80s when Georgetown had those teams and they went to 3 Final Fours and 3 championship games, as a matter of fact, in 4 years, and won the national title in 1984. Maryland is not rebuilding. They're a good team. They got votes for the top 25, but didn't get into the top 25, but I would bet they'll get there this year. And they're an interesting mix. They've got a couple of guys who you're familiar with. Dante Scott is back for his 5th year. Seems like he's been there like 10. Julian Reese coming back for his 3rd year at Maryland. And they brought in some new players, as they do these days. The transfer portal is a revolving door. And there's a new player by the name of Jordan Geronimo, who's been at Indiana for the last 3 years. He's got 2 years of eligibility, and he is an athletic player, which is what Willard says he really needs, because he realized last year when they got smoked by Alabama in the NCAA tournament that they just weren't athletic enough. That was a big need. So, used to be you start scouting the high schools and you find somebody that you think you can develop in a couple of years to be that player. It doesn't work that way anymore. Transfer portal. You check around, you see who's in, and then you pursue them and you get them as quickly as possible. And you're kind of, the way things work now, you're kind of behind the 8 ball when you're in the NCAA tournament, because you got to get at it right away. But in bringing in Geronimo, which is a really cool name, Jordan Geronimo, he's 6'6", 225 pounds, played mostly as a big at Indiana because of the way that team was built, but he's going to be more of a 4, kind of thing. Might even play some at guard. But he's familiar with Willard. He was recruited by Willard when he was at Seton Hall, and he played 27 games last year for Indiana. And they hope that he's going to be a big addition this year. They've got some guys coming back, as I say. Jameer Young, who was all Big Ten second team. I think this is going to be his 6th year this year because he played a 5th year last year with COVID and got a 6th year, so he's coming back. It's a fun team to watch. I think Willard has done a really good job. But the Georgetown matchup, and that's why I started with Georgetown, this is something that has been a front burner issue for me and for others who love college basketball in this town and talk about these things from time to time, is why can't we have an annual Maryland-Georgetown game? Well, the historians trace this back, and you can ask John Feinstein about this. I'm sure he's written about it many times. This happened during the 1970s, maybe 79. Maryland and Georgetown played at the Armory. This was not at the Capitol Center. It was at the Armory. And there was some type of altercation, and John Thompson unleashed his famous multi-syllable curse word at Lefty Driesell, and things just sort of devolved from there. And Maryland didn't want to lose to Georgetown. Georgetown didn't want to lose to Maryland. They couldn't get together. So finally, in 1993, Russ Potts, who was a promoter and was familiar with the Maryland program, got the game together. Now, Maryland was anxious to play. This is Gary Williams rebuilding after the mess left behind by Bob Wade. So he's coming out of probation. He's recruited Keith Booth, who is one of the top recruits in the country, and he also has brought in Joe Smith. Now, Joe Smith was overlooked when he was growing up in Hampton because he played AAU with Allen Iverson. And Iverson took all the shots. So they looked at Joe Smith's stats and go, well, he's scoring 10, 12 points a game. What's the big deal? Well, Gary watched him play, and he said, yeah, that's a guy who could fit in. And so that made Maryland a team to be reckoned with in the 2 years that Joe Smith was there, including that first game at Georgetown, because Maryland was a huge underdog. They were not expected to be able to compete with Georgetown's size. And they won the game in overtime on a Dwayne Simpkins shot. And they didn't play again. I think the next time, that's 93. So the next time they would have played would have been 8 years later in the NCAA tournament when they met in the Sweet 16. They were not able to get a regular season game together, I don't think, I may be wrong about this, but I don't think until 2016 when they played at Maryland, and they played there for the first time in like 30 years. Over 30 years, and Maryland won that game, and they have not played since. But, Lefty's long gone from Maryland. John Thompson has passed away. Gary retired at Maryland. And now, 2 coaches later, here's Willard. He doesn't know all this history. And Ed Cooley is looking to put his program on the map now, kind of a reversal of fortune there at Georgetown. So they're interested in playing, and the only reason that it didn't happen this year is because Maryland is scheduled to play in a tournament in Asheville in early November, and just the scheduling of it didn't work out well. They just couldn't get it together. He said, this is Willard speaking yesterday, ours is the 10th and the 11th, which is usually when you play your second home non-conference game. So this year's schedule a little bit hampered, and we just couldn't get it together. But did say this about an annual meeting with Georgetown.
We're close. Ed's a really good friend, and I understand from the fan bases how important that game is for this area. I get it. He gets it. We were going to start it this year. It was like done, and it was a date thing. It was our date. I couldn't find the date. So next year, I'm pretty confident that we'll start it.
That'd be great. And maybe they do it Thanksgiving weekend. That was pretty cool last time they did that in 1993. And I think that'd be a lot of fun. And I think it could be home and home, so you could play it at Maryland one year and on Georgetown's court, which is Capital One Arena. But it would be okay, too, if it was always held at Capital One Arena. You have it downtown. People can go out and celebrate. You got the 2 fan bases. It'd be great fun. More from Willard yesterday. This is on the freshman class that he's bringing in, which he says is the best freshman class he's ever had. Now, he's only his second year at Maryland, but he coached for a long time at Seton Hall, had some pretty good teams there, and he says this one is the best, and here's why he says that.
They're physically ready to play. Most freshmen come in, and really one of the biggest hurdles that they have is that physically they can't compete at this level. Deshaun, Jamie, John has worked tirelessly to get in great shape. Braden has very good size. So physically they're able to play and compete at this level. And as far as them kind of joining in, we lost some really good players, and so those guys have been able to. Jameer's been great. Dante Scott's had the best preseason. I've only been here 2 years with them, but for the last 2 years, those guys have really helped these guys understand how we work, when we work, what we do. So it's been a smooth integration, to be honest with you, because the older guys have really taken them under the wing. Italy helped tremendously. I mean, Italy really did help. Having those 10 days of practice, going over there, seeing personalities, seeing how guys would play together, it helped dramatically.
Yeah, they took the team to Italy, and those are cool things that they do in college sports these days, that everybody gets a couple weeks in Italy, gets to play some basketball, eat some good food, all that. Willard has done a good job with this. And remember, when he took over, there had been an early season change. Mark Turgeon resigned, I think it was like in November of the previous year. Danny Manning, his assistant, took over. They weren't a good team, but they were, relatively respectable towards the end of the year, but nobody's showing up for the games. And what Willard has done is to reignite some passion, and they've had some really good crowds for Maryland games, and he has done a good job of courting the fan base, as he did again yesterday.
I understand the fan base. I've got to know the fan base. I spent a lot of time this summer out and about. I spent a lot of time in Baltimore, whether going to Orioles games or dinners or things like that. So, I love this fan base. I love how passionate they are. I love the fact that they're everywhere, no matter where you go. You're on an airplane, you're in San Francisco, they're everywhere. It's great. New York, I spent a lot of time in New York too, because we have a huge alumni base in New York. It's a passionate fan base, and I'd much rather have a fan base that's passionate, involved, and holds you to a certain standard than a fan base that doesn't. I love this building. I can't wait to start playing again. I think it's one of the best college environments, bar none. And I think anyone that comes in this building right now would agree with me.
Yeah, funny thing about the Xfinity Center, it's amazing how quickly time passes for those of us who fondly remember the days of going to Cole Fieldhouse when it was an unbelievable place to play. When they would play North Carolina and Duke in those games, and no air conditioning when it was hot, and even when it was like 20 degrees outside, somehow the heat would kick up, and the passion from the fans would make that place just a hot box, and the games were unbelievable. And the fear was, after they won the NCAA championship in 2002, and that was their last season at Cole Fieldhouse, that the new building wouldn't have that same type of intensity, that something would be lost there. And they played an early season game. I remember this in the 2002-2003 season. They still had a few guys left. Steve Blake was still on the team, Drew Nicholas, several of the other guys who'd played in the national championship. And they played Florida, they may have been ranked 1, maybe 2, and they beat Florida in an intense game there. And it kind of ignited that building. I think it was a big sigh of relief for Gary Williams, who loved playing at Cole when he was a player, but even more so coaching there, and the kind of atmosphere that he could create and have his home court advantage. He wondered whether he would still have that at Xfinity, and it pretty much has. Now, there have been some bad teams and attendance has fallen off, but now that Willard has got them back into the NCAA tournament, and with a team that looks very promising this year, I think it's going to be a great atmosphere and a great place to play. And I think he's right. When it's cooking, it is probably one of the top 10 places in the country to play. Is it Cameron? No, but it's pretty damn good. And that's been a really nice thing. And then you think about this, that it's over 20 years old. I mean, I would still think of it as the new place, but it's over 20 years that they've been playing there. This is the last part that I pulled from the news conference. He spoke for about 20 minutes yesterday. This is about how quickly you have to get back on the horse. And they got smoked by Alabama in the round of 32. They won their first round game. and then played a team which, could have won the national championship. They were that good. And he realized, okay, we got to make some changes, and we got to do them quickly. So this was him describing how quickly things turned after they lost that game to Alabama last March.
That team gave me everything that they could possibly give. We kind of hit the ceiling against Alabama when you really go back and look at it, and they gave us everything. But once you kind of get back from the NCAA tournament, the portal's open, and it's nonstop. So you have to, it didn't close till May 17th this year, May 16th, I think it was somewhere around that. So you don't know what your roster is looking like until, Ian put his name in the portal the last day, where I thought Ian might be a starter. So all of a sudden you have no offseason, you have no time to feel bad, it doesn't exist anymore. And the way the NCAA recruiting calendar is now, everything has changed dramatically. So I think all college coaches were kind of like, there's one guy happy at the end of the year, I'm sure. I'm sure Danny was really, really happy, if Danny can be happy. And everyone else is, miserable, but you have to get to work.
Yeah, that's Danny Hurley, of course, the coach at Connecticut. They won the national title. Yeah, it's a different ball game. It really is. And the transfer portal changes everything. I don't even know why you would recruit high school players now. There's really no reason to. Certainly if you've got that big stud guy coming out, but he's going to be one and done. Why not take a look at players who have been tested? And if a guy's a superstar, he's going to go to the NBA. It's highly unlikely he's coming back for another year. He may be unhappy with certain things, and nowadays, with the NIL, you can pay him more money. That's the bidding war. In fact, I'll talk about this coming up. What's going on with the NCAA, such as it is these days, and trying to keep a stranglehold on the concept of student athlete, which has long been dead. I'll get to that a little bit later, but yeah, you basically, so it's more like being a GM of an NBA team with complete free agency for everybody. It's not like nobody's under contract right now. Everybody can go, and I don't know. Is there any penalty if you tamper with a guy who hasn't entered the transfer portal? I haven't heard of that. Like if you contact a player who's with a team and is not in the portal, do you get popped for that? I don't think so. You could certainly put out a feeler. You probably know somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody who can get to that player and say, hey, would you like to come to Maryland? We can really hook you up with some nice NIL money, a nice car, and nice house and all that. So yeah, it's a whole new ball game. Coming up, it was 70 years ago today that Willie Thrower became the first African American to play quarterback in the NFL. The ramifications of that and more as we continue. It's the Andy Pollin Show, ESPN 630. Tony coming up at 11 o'clock today. So it was 70 years ago today that the Chicago Bears at home were playing the San Francisco 49ers. Regular season game, halfway through the season, middle of October. In those days, I believe they played a 12-game schedule. So about halfway through at this point. And during the game, which the Bears are trailing, George Halas, who was the founder of the Bears, in fact, at one time he was a player, owner, coach, the whole deal. And by 1953, he's long retired as a player, and he's a coach. And he coached a long time. He coached from, I guess, 1920 until he retired after the 1967 season. So he's still got a long way to go as a coach. He won a championship in 1963. And he's coaching this team, and things aren't going well. And he inserts a quarterback who had not been drafted but had been signed as a free agent going into 1953. He got a one-year, $8,500 contract. He was a quarterback, and he happened to be African-American. And he was limited in where he could even go to college and play football. In those days, he was from Pennsylvania. But in those days, you couldn't play football in the South if you were black. Maryland wasn't taking black players in 1953, but the Big Ten was. And he wound up as the quarterback at Michigan State and was good enough to catch the eye of the Bears, and they signed him to this contract as the backup to George Blanda, who was the starting quarterback at that point, 1953. So they're trailing, and they insert Willie Thrower into the game. And this is how it was described the following day in the Chicago Tribune. In the 10th minute of the period, Joe Perry fumbled and Dick Hensley recovered on the 49ers 16. Willie Thrower, the former Michigan State, and this is how they would refer to blacks in those days, Negro quarterback star, making his major league debut, passed to Jim Dooley, putting the ball on the 4. Blanda and Fred Morrison came into the game with a resounding raspberry. They wanted Willie to put it over, but Morrison did it on a blast off tackle. The boos changed to cheers. So in other words, there's a fumble, and rather than Hallis put Blanda back in the game, he says to his backup quarterback, come in and take us down the field, which he did. Thrower completed 3 out of 8 passes, got them to the 4-yard line, and inside the red zone, Blanda comes back in. Hallis says, okay, you're going to take it from here, and he put it in, but they lost the game. In 1988, so this is now 25 years after this debut, Willie Thrower, who passed away at the age of 71 in 2002, so this was 1988, some years before he passed away, he was on a radio show describing what happened and how he got in the game on this day 70 years ago.
It was a close game at the time that I had went in, and he took me out at the 4-yard line.
Now, why in the world did he do that?
I was a little mad, and the fans were a little mad because he took me out. Well, like I said, it was a close game, and he figured George Blanda had more experience than I had at the time.
Well,
so we went in, he took him in for a touchdown, and that tied the score up, and they came back and made another touchdown, beat us 35-28.
Sounds to me, Mr. Thurl, like you did most of the work and Blanda got the glory on that particular situation.
On that particular day. Well, see, most of the fans there had seen me play or heard of me playing at Michigan State, because most of the players that was on the Michigan State team was from the Chicago area.
Okay.
So most of the fans was a little mad because he took me out, and the game was just about over at the time that he put me in. So we finally ended up the score 35-28.
Yeah, that was the final score. So they lost the game. He played one series, and I guess people there noticed it, but I guess there was not a lot of conversation about how he had broken the color line in much the same way, not exactly the same way, but how Jackie Robinson had done it 6 years earlier in baseball when he broke the color line playing opening day for the Brooklyn Dodgers. There was, at that time, a lot of the players anyway in the NFL were from the South. There was a lot of prejudice, and the teams were, in some cases like here, Washington, 8 years away. It's amazing. 9 years away from integration. Bobby Mitchell finally broke the color line for the Redskins in 1962. But Thrower said it was a little bit different atmosphere with the Chicago Bears, and George Hallis had a lot to do with it.
The linemen at the Bears, they had never played with any blacks.
Okay.
Most of the linemen were from Southern school, and they hadn't played against any blacks at that time. But by George Hallis being a strong coach and so forth, there wasn't too much racism or prejudice there at the time, because George was a very strong coach and a very strong person, and he wouldn't allow any of that to go on.
Did you notice anything in the locker room? Did the guys have that camaraderie, that spirit of togetherness, or were things kind of like separated in the locker room?
No, there was nothing that was separated. I mean, it was all team effort. I mean, we had 4 blacks besides me on the team, but there was no prejudice in no way there.
So that was Willie Thrower in 1988. Let's look at the progression here, and I found this to be fascinating from the recap on Wikipedia. So, they're not always 100% correct, but if this is really interesting. It says on the Wikipedia page that Willie Thrower, the black quarterback who broke the color line for the Bears, from the first African-American to play quarterback in the NFL, was a roommate of George Blanda. So that's 1953. That's 12 years before Gale Sayers, a black man from the Midwest, roomed with Brian Piccolo, a white man from the South, and that's a lot of the basis of the movie Brian's Song. And so that's seen as a seminal moment in football and sports, for that matter, that a black player and a white player are rooming together when it didn't happen very often in sports. But according to the Wikipedia page, it happened in 1953 when Blanda roomed with Willie Thrower. That's really incredible. Thrower only played in one other game that year. He was cut by the Bears at the end of the season, played in Canada for a few years, and then retired to his home in Pennsylvania and did a variety of things, passed away of a heart attack in 2002. But if you look at the progression that happened from this and how slow it was, as I mentioned, Bobby Mitchell doesn't break the color line for the Redskins until 1962. It is not until 1966, so that's 13 years later, that a black man becomes the first quarterback to start, first black quarterback, Marlon Briscoe, who started for the Denver Broncos in 1966. It's not until 1969 that James Shaq Harris becomes the starting quarterback for the Buffalo Bills on a regular basis, like named starting quarterback, and they go the rest of the way with him. And then this is the real kicker for me. 1978. So that's now, a nice round number. That's 25 years after Willie Thrower has broken the color line for quarterbacks in the NFL, proved certainly that they can do it, that Warren Moon, coming out of the University of Washington, where he took the Huskies to the Rose Bowl, is not drafted in 12 rounds of the NFL draft. 25 years later, Warren Moon goes to Canada, becomes a star there. Houston Oilers bring him to the NFL after that. Got to play 6 years. I think he was 6 years in Canada. Comes to the NFL, has a great long career in the NFL, and is in the Hall of Fame. Think of how slowly things move. And then, here's another number. 35 years after Willie Thrower breaks the color line, Doug Williams becomes the first African-American to start in a Super Bowl and, of course, win a Super Bowl. And then it takes another, how many more years till 2003? Another 35 years or whatever it is, 25 years for us to have 35 years for two African-Americans to start head-to-head in the Super Bowl. So think of all the things that happened. It's 70 years later. We have two starting quarterbacks who are African-American in the Super Bowl. 70 years later, 70 years after Willie Thrower breaks the color line. And it's just remarkable to look at that and to see where we are now. And think about this. Charlie Ward, who comes out of Florida State in 1993, so we're talking 40 years later, 40 years after Willie Thrower. He wins the Heisman Trophy, and he says to teams, if you're not going to take me in the first round, I'm going to play basketball. And nobody took a flyer on Charlie Ward. Charlie Ward's coming out today. He's the number one pick because he does what the modern NFL quarterback does. He runs, and he had a great arm, and he was a great college quarterback. But that's how slowly things moved on that. Just absolutely remarkable. And Willie Thrower is remembered in his hometown, and he is there's a statue of him that has been put up near Valley High School to honor his accomplishments. That's where he played, and there was a game that where the statue was unveiled in 2006. Steelers owner Dan Rooney, as well as Thrower's family, was there. And they have done interviews with his son, and he is amazed that people don't remember him as they should. In 2001, the Willie Thrower Award Foundation debuted as an award for the top quarterback in the City League, which is the league that his high school plays in, honoring the top quarterback for the season. And the award is a replica statue of Thrower. October 12th has been designated as Willie Thrower Community Day. There's passed in New Kensington. Part of a 4-day celebration of the 70th anniversary. But it was on this day in 1953 that Willie Thrower did something that should be remembered, and also should be remembered for how slow progress came after he did that. I mean, you would think that not that he had to prove that, but he certainly proved that he could play and could be on an NFL roster and could be a backup quarterback and could come into a game and move a team down to the 4-yard line. And had he been given the chance, probably would have put the team in the end zone and probably could have played. Because there's pictures of him. He wasn't a big guy. I think he was only about 6 feet tall. But if you look at pictures, he had an enormous hands, and so the ball looks like a Nerf football in his hands. So I imagine he had a pretty good ability to throw the football. It just didn't happen for him, and for others that followed, long time, many generations, never got the opportunity to play quarterback in the NFL. And Doug Williams was a breakthrough, and then Michael Vick, 2001, also a breakthrough, first African-American quarterback to be drafted number one overall. But again, many, many years after Willie Thrower did what he did. All right, coming up, we got the Tony Kornheiser Show. I will be back here tomorrow at 9 a.m. with my show. Enjoy this beautiful weather, and stay tuned for Tony coming up next.